by pseudoscience, says Roger, who's a teacher. Isn't that great, Verity? That's perhaps the way forward.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I would have loved to have had that growing up, especially because he's right. And there's so much stuff on social media that says is apparently from a scientific background, whereas actually it's just someone making all of this stuff up. Critical thinking is absolutely going to save us with this, as well as also, like, I feel as though we've been very naive for a very long time about the risks of this. Over the last 5 years, we've seen this getting far more extreme on online content platforms.
5 to 5 now to on the final night, to our Small Business Made in New Zealand segment, which we've been running for a few weeks now. And this time we talk handmade knives. Brookdale Knives, they're based in Hunter. I think it's just out of Timaru, I think. And the artisan knife maker is Scott Gregan. From chefing knives to huntering knives, Scott has been making knives for 4 years and specialises in full tang stainless steel knives. And Scott Gregan is with me now. Kia ora, Scott.
Oh, kia ora, Wallace. Thank you very much for having me on. Yeah, so Brookdale Knives is my brand of knives. I make them myself. I'm the only person in the business, and I believe in a good quality knife, and I think everyone should have access to that, and that's why I make my knives.
Good on you. Well, I've been looking at the knives online, and they're pretty flash-looking. You know, beautifully made with a stainless steel. You're only 15, as I understand. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
How did you get into making knives?
Well, my grandfather he's a sheddy. He's had his shed in his backyard. It was a garage, but I don't think it's ever had any cars in it, filled with tools and machinery. And as a young boy, I always used to go there and build things with him. And I guess it's just a build on from that. I was looking to make a gift when I was about 11 or 12. And I decided upon a knife for some reason, and I became fixated on it, and I started making more and more, and I've learnt from Stackhouse Knives, Shea Stackhouse in Wellington, Reefy Knives, John Worthington down in Clyde, and I've just gone from there, and
And this is something that you want to keep doing for some time. Scott, you're 15 now, you've got plenty of years, decades even, to keep on mastering the knife-making skill?
Yeah, I think it will always be a hobby, just for the enjoyment factor. But, it's something that I'd love to continue to do and something I'd love to continue to develop. It's quite an exciting time, I feel. A lot of people are going away from that kind of needless consumerism and going back into buying high-quality things that are handmade, by people in their own community, thanks to, wonderful programs like yours that are highlighting New Zealand small businesses and New Zealand makers.
Hey, Scott, welcome. Good on you, and keep up the knife work. There's an entrepreneur, Peter.
Oh, brilliant, and congratulations to him. And I just had a look at some of the products online. Pretty impressive.
Amazing, hey. Hey, you've been wonderful this afternoon. Verity Johnson, Peter Dunn, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon on Monday's show. And the checkpoint is next. I'm Wallace Chapman, back with you 3:45 tomorrow. Till then, see you later.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere nei, the election countdown clock is reset. 61 days to go. The new date is October 17. But what if there's another outbreak? Who calls it, and how far can polling day be pushed out? The Chief Electoral Officer joins us. 9 new COVID-19 cases are linked to the Auckland cluster. The deadline to test all port workers by midnight tonight is tossed into the too hard basket. And trouble in paradise as day-tripping Aucklanders head to Waiheke Island despite Level 3 restrictions. Police are ramping up checkpoints at the Supercity border. Assistant Commissioner Richard Chambers is live. And in Australia, Victoria suffers a record 25 COVID deaths in 24 hours.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. An estimated 930,000 people will be supported by 2 wage subsidy schemes being offered by the government. A new nationwide subsidy to cover the period Auckland is in Alert Level 3 is being rolled out, on top of the existing wage subsidy extension. The government is also making it easier for people to access the sick leave support scheme. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says it's crucial people have confidence they won't lose their income if they come forward to have a COVID-19 test.
And particularly when we look at this particular outbreak where, it may affect people who come from low-income backgrounds, job occupations that are lower income, we just want to make absolutely sure that no one sees a barrier to being tested, because that is so important for all of us.
Grant Robertson. There's confidence that testing of all workers at the Port of Tauranga will be completed by the end of the week. The Ministry for Health has issued a mandatory testing notice for nearly 12,000 workers at the Tauranga and Auckland ports. Andrew McRae reports.
Bay of Plenty DHB Incident Controller Joe Bourne says priority has been given to those who've been on board a vessel in the last 14 days and had direct contact with crew. He says only port workers and others who've had dealings there since July the 21st will be tested. Dr Bourne says they can stay on the job while they await their results. A team of about 20 medical staff are on site and more can be added if necessary. From tomorrow, it'll be open for 12 hours from 8 in the morning. Ko Andrew McRae tēnei.
Ports of Auckland says it's unlikely coronavirus testing of all its 6,000 workers would have been completed by midnight. Port spokesman Matt Ball says it was only notified of the compulsory testing on Friday night, and it was optimistic to think all staff would be tested in time. He says testing will run as long as it takes. The Director-General of Health insists there has been no testing failure at the border regarding COVID-19. This is despite the Minister of Health last week saying not enough testing was being done of border personnel, including at isolation hotels. Ashley Bloomfield says regular testing was being scaled up when the outbreak emerged, but he does not believe officials have dropped the ball.
I don't think there's been a failure. I think that I know there's a desire to look for a point of failure here. Our border systems we have been continually strengthening. We have added in the testing of workforce, which was being scaled up as part of belt and braces.
Dr Bloomfield says officials cannot flick a switch and begin testing everyone immediately. The Electoral Office has the ability to delay the election day in one region if it's deemed unsafe to vote. This morning, the Prime Minister postponed the election to October 17th, saying any further moves are up to the Electoral Office. The Chief Electoral Officer, Alicia Wright, says once Parliament is dissolved, the Commission has the power to delay voting in a region.
If there is a region or area that it is unsafe to vote at, this is an old provision. It's been around for a really long time. It's used for earthquakes and all sorts of different things. It's designed that we can adjourn polling until that area is safe.
Alicia Wright says the Commission is also working through how voting will work at different alert levels, including takeaway and postal options. A light plane has crashed in Hote, north of Wellington. The police say the crash happened near Otaki Gorge Road about 1:30. The condition of the pilot is not yet known. The Victorian Premier says today's relatively low number of new COVID-19 cases is promising, despite the state setting a new record for daily deaths with 25. Victoria has 282 new infections, and Daniel Andrews says anything under 300 right now is welcome.
To have another sub-300 day is good in terms of that trend and that general movement down towards lower case numbers. But as I said yesterday, we're strong. There's good cause for people to be hopeful about the future, but we just can't allow any sense of complacency to creep in here. This is an ultra-marathon and we just have to keep pushing forward.
The Victorian Premier, Daniel Andrews. It's 4.5 minutes past 5. Gold Coast are being urged to offer Kiwis Rugby League forward Kevin Proctor a new contract regardless of the outcome of his biting charge. The 31-year-old has been referred straight to the NRL judiciary after he became the first player in competition history to be sent off for biting during Saturday's loss to Cronulla. Proctor insists he didn't bite fellow Kiwi international and Sharks playmaker Shaun Johnson, but faces a lengthy suspension if he's found guilty tomorrow night. Proctor is off contract at the end of the season, but former Gold Coast football manager Scott Sattler says the Titans need Proctor's leadership next year, whether he's suspended or not. And Andretti, a name synonymous with American motor racing, has won pole position at the Indianapolis 500 for the first time in more than 30 years. Marco Andretti, the grandson of 1969 Indy 500 winner Mario Andretti, pipped New Zealand's Scott Dixon for pole for next week's race at the Brickyard. Mario was last on pole in 1987. The 33-year-old Andretti says he was thinking of his grandfather before qualifying.
I thought of him because today I walked out of the motorhome, it was pretty windy. He has a famous quote within us. He doesn't say it to many people, but he says, the wind will scare you, but it'll never crash you. So today, he was right. I don't know if that's right, totally, but it's pretty awesome.
Marco Andretti, that's the news.
Closing provincial borders.
We struggled to cope with managing our health in normal times, and in a crisis situation, another 10,000 coming from Auckland is just going to throw things completely.
A challenging testing program.
It's a big ask to get that many, even if it was, say, 3,000 or 4,000. It's a big ask, but it's COVID-19.
But doing the right thing can come at a cost for families.
The family has been rather stunned by this event, particularly with some of the nasty stuff that has gone on social media.
Covering the impact of the COVID pandemic. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. A few showers turning to rain in Northland tomorrow. Waikato to Kapiti, also Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Mainly fine. Isolated showers developing in Bay of Plenty and Taupo tomorrow and rain in Taranaki tomorrow night. For Gisborne through to Wairarapa and Wellington. Mainly fine. High cloud increasing tomorrow. Nelson, Buller, Westland and Fiordland fine tonight. Becoming cloudy tomorrow. Rain developing by evening with heavy falls in some places. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland fine tonight apart from some areas of cloud. Cloud increasing tomorrow with scattered light rain at night. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers, clearing tomorrow morning. RNZ National. It's coming up to 7.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, island-hopping Aucklanders breaking Level 3 rules and police ramp up border controls around our super city. Is it time to introduce spot fines? Assistant Police Commissioner Richard Chambers joins us live. But first, the election countdown clock has been reset, with the Prime Minister pushing back polling day by 4 weeks to October the 17th, due to the latest outbreak of COVID-19. Jacinda Ardern has been under increasing pressure from other political parties to delay the election date after Auckland was put into a 2-week lockdown at alert level 3. Her own Deputy Prime Minister claiming a free and fair election wasn't possible, with the playing field hopelessly compromised by current restrictions. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
2020, call it the false start election. Just over a week ago, Jacinda Ardern kicked off Labour's campaign in Auckland. Today, she put it on hold, along with the election.
I have decided on balance to move the election by 4 weeks to the 17th of October.
The campaign, like the country, derailed by COVID-19. With Auckland at alert level 3, it means no campaign rallies, no door-knocking, a barnstorming ban in New Zealand's biggest city. Never mind the general levels of anxiety among the voting public.
The only decision she could have made, I think the uncertainty was just too difficult.
I think it's probably quite a good thing, really, with what's going on at the moment.
It's probably the best thing till we kind of get past the next few weeks, month or so, for everything to kind of smooth over.
And that turbulence front of mind for the Prime Minister.
I do need to provide certainty, a sense of fairness and a sense of comfort to voters that this will be a safe election, and I do think a little extra time to assure them of that is important as well.
It was a decision made under intense pressure and after consultation with all parties, National, New Zealand First and ACT, all clamouring for the election to be postponed. Winston Peters underlined the severity of that pressure yesterday. He issued a statement saying the Governor-General should know that the majority of Parliament favoured a delay.
We owed the Prime Minister our best experienced advice, and that's what we afforded her, and I'm glad that she's made that decision.
It was seen by some as a veiled threat that New Zealand First might force a vote of no confidence if it did not get its way, though Mr Peters says that was not his intent.
I merely pointed out the obvious. No more, no less.
I personally didn't consider that a threat in the first place.
Frankly, the kind of flirtation with creating a constitutional crisis if he didn't get his way was risky.
That's the Greens co-leader James Shaw. He backs the Prime Minister's decision, but is furious with those parties which called for delay. He says they were operating out of naked political self-interest as they wallow in the polls.
When you have politicians saying that they don't think an election can be free and fair, what they're essentially doing is blackmailing the country into saying, well, unless we get our way, we have the ability to say that it is an invalid election.
Mr Shaw says all parties must now fully endorse Voting Day 2.0, and ACT has done just that. Here's David Seymour.
Yeah, I think it's the best of a bad set of choices.
But National's less effusive. Its leader, Judith Collins, issuing a lukewarm statement, saying only that she acknowledges the new date.
We'll work with it. We'll do the best we can in terms of getting policies out to the public and getting feedback from them.
It's been a messy few days of politicking about polling day, a situation the Prime Minister will be keen to avoid again. Indeed, this delay will be the last one initiated by Ms Ardern. She says she won't move the date again. Any further decisions will be left to the Electoral Commission.
I have absolutely no intention at all to change from this point. This gives really a clear run for everyone to understand we are all in the same position and we have to all prepare no matter what.
The campaign pause means it's back to Parliament for MPs tomorrow. They'll reconvene on Tuesday and Wednesday for general debate and question time. Here's one question. What can we do to avoid another false start? Atu i te whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi ko Craig McCulloch.
Waiheke locals are bemoaning the presence of Auckland day trippers to the popular Hauraki Gulf Island. It follows reports some non-residents travelled to the island over the weekend and hired scooters for the day. But the business at the centre of Deferral believes it's doing nothing wrong. Nick Trubridge and Nick Monroe made the trip to Waiheke Island today and discovered some trouble in paradise.
It's where Aucklanders flock to get away from the big city, but the message from some locals on Waiheke Island is clear. Stay home.
It's unfortunate. I can understand on this lovely day why people would want to come over, but it just needs one. And unfortunately, I don't think we can take that risk, and it would be pretty careless really to come over, just in case. We're all doing the job, let's stick to it.
Yeah, it would spread like wildfire. And we've got a lot of elderly people, so let's just go hard for 2 weeks and stop it from coming over here.
Accusations of level 3 lockdown breaches were flying on the island over the weekend, with reports of people making day trips from Auckland and renting out scooters and bikes. Chris Hoff-Nielsen, the owner of Oniroa Village's Bikes and Barbers, is at the centre of the discontent. He stayed open over the weekend and is still operating when we visit him on Monday. Hoff-Nielsen confirms he did rent scooters out to the public over the weekend, but says he's taking every precaution to stop the spread.
Some of that was even, I think, directed towards us. And what's very strange for me was that we had one family that was staying here on the island that had a birthday. There were 5 people in that bubble. 6 people in that bubble. And those 6 people rented scooters for a day, and then they went back to their house, and I was a bit sort of surprised of how that all went.
Hoff-Nielsen clearly believes he's done nothing wrong.
I would not have rented them out, scooters, had they not been in their bubble. That's the whole idea of what we're doing, trying to get rid of this. So yeah, our number one concern, that was also what we asked the customers and others, because we have also refused quite a few, that were asking whether or not they could go for trips. But trips is not the idea. This is about being able to just have a little bit of a normality in a day, but not do excursions. So this was not an excursion.
But there's trouble in paradise. Further down Ocean View Road is fish and chip restaurant The Local. Owner Simon Pope, who made the call to close even his takeaway service on Saturday, says he's not prepared to trade after hearing and seeing non-locals arrive on the island from Auckland for day trips.
Sarah, my wife, went home. We were in here yesterday. She went home to pick up some stuff and saw a group of 8 riding scooters all together. In fact, a friend of ours that owns the Palm Beach store said he wondered why a whole bunch of people on white scooters were hanging around the outside of the shop. So it's a small community. Everybody looks after everybody else, and news travels fairly quickly, even outside of that community.
Waiheke Island is COVID-19 free, and Pope says residents are desperate to keep it that way.
It was defeating the whole purpose of us all, 99.9% of us, abiding by the rules, and then having the odd exception coming over and potentially bringing something with them. So we then decided, we had a chat, there was 3 of us here on Saturday. We then made a call, right, we're just going to shut, and that's when we put the post out and said this is what we're doing, and just wanted to be safe and secure.
But locals here aren't just pointing the finger at day trippers. They believe Fuller's, which runs a popular ferry service to Waiheke Island, needs to take responsibility too.
There is a locals line that Fuller's operate over summer, where you have to produce evidence that you live on the island. So I'm sure that could occur again. Why are you coming over to Waiheke? Oh, we're coming for a day trip. Well, sorry, you've got to wait. Or produce your Captain's Club card or whatever they, your 40 trip ticket. So there are ways and means of guarding those borders, I feel.
The sentiment is shared by Community Board Chairwoman Kath Handley.
It would be good to get more security type of help down at the wharves. I think because we've always, and I think Victoria, New South Wales have indicated, people don't get it seriously enough, how dangerous this is, and it's particularly dangerous for an island that doesn't have any kind of secondary or tertiary medical facilities.
She sees day trips to the island as a clear breach of Level 3 restrictions. Handley says her job as chairwoman is to look after the people of Waiheke and is asking mainlanders to stay away.
People are always aware if there are people who are visitors as opposed to locals, not because we know locals, but because your behaviour when you're local is different, like hiring the scooters. So I think it became, maybe it was bigger than a handful, because clearly one of our local shops that was doing contactless takeaways closed because they felt themselves at so much risk. So I don't think we have got the controls in place that we fought really hard to get in place last time, first, at level 3 before we went into level 4.
In a statement, Fuller's says passenger volumes have reduced significantly and it's happy with compliance levels.
Over this last weekend, we transported fewer than 530 passengers to Waiheke across Saturday and Sunday, compared to the approximately 4,000 passengers who travelled to Waiheke last weekend.
But some spoken to by Checkpoint think a harder approach is necessary.
I think that the enforcement of the whole thing of keeping people at bay or at home, I think that should be a lot stricter. Issue fines and not just a slap on the wrist and say, get on home,
So the message here from locals is crystal clear. Aucklanders, keep your distance for the next week and a half at least. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
While listening to that is Assistant Police Commissioner Richard Chambers, who joins us now with the latest. Good evening. Is people, trotting off to the islands for a day trip, is that a problem?
Oh, good afternoon, Lisa. Well, look, we totally understand the situation that Waiheke is voicing its concerns. Look, many communities have voiced their concerns, and our job is to work with the rules within Alert Level 3, and Waiheke Island is within Alert Level 3 as well. So police will continue to do the best job that we can, given what is a very challenging situation for everyone.
So are you going to put a checkpoint at the ferry terminal?
Look, our plea to everybody is that I think everybody understands what's expected, and as has been said, the vast majority of people are doing the right thing. There are a few that don't seem to understand or are ignoring those, and where we can, we have a conversation with them. But we continue to say to please, avoid unnecessary travel. People need to understand that there's the reason we're all doing this is for the greater good of all communities across Auckland and ultimately for our country. So if people are unsure about what those expectations are, then they need to have a look at the government COVID-19 website.
But you think the majority do know what's expected of them, and clearly some people think that the rules don't apply to them, and a number of them are going off on to a Waiheke island and goodness knows where else. So is that something you need to look at? Will you have a chat to Fuller's Ferries about some way of checking that people are getting on the ferry are residents on the island?
Well, if we are getting calls coming into our 105 number, we will be following those up. And if they relate to Waiheke, events on Waiheke Island, then it may be that my colleagues on the island will need to speak to Fuller's. But at this stage, I think we've heard that the amount of traffic that has been finding its way to Waiheke on the ferry is significantly reduced, which says that the majority are doing the right thing. A small number may not be, and it's those people that we'd like to know about, then we can have a conversation with them.
For clarity, if people have a batch and that batch is within the super city limits but is not their primary residence, are they allowed to trot across town or up the way, 100 k's to that second house?
Look, I think let's just perhaps not get too focused on Waiheke Island as such, but within Alert Level 3, which Waiheke is obviously part of, people can move around within Alert Level 3 so long as they abide by the expectations, which is social distancing, staying within their bubble, not having a gathering of more than 10 people. That's pretty basic stuff. So, and of course, our request is that they spend as much time as they can as their place of usual residence, which is the right thing to do.
But their primary home.
Nothing stopping someone.
Yeah, their primary home, according to the rules that are posted online, sorry to interrupt, but it says you can only travel in the Auckland region to return to your primary home. So this is not a question about Waiheke, this is a question about people going to second homes and batches, because Waiheke is not the only issue. There's obviously Pakiri, Omaha, Matakana. So how do you check out your checkpoints whether people are taking the mickey here?
Well, obviously that's a very big challenge for us. Putting a border in the northern and southern end of our country's biggest city is no small task, and that is quite simply why the government, police and health have said loud and clear since the beginning of this year just how important it is for everybody to understand what's expected of them and for each and every one of us to do the right thing. That's how we'll get the result we all need quicker.
So what proof are you asking them when you stop them?
Well, so in terms of the checkpoints north and south of Auckland, obviously essential workers who are going from one place to another for essential work are required to produce some documentation. Now, that can be a number of things. For instance, health workers, their ID badge, their photo ID badge, other critical goods and services. But if there's any doubt as to what those essential services are, I'd encourage people to have a look at the government COVID website because it's very clear who that applies to. And one of the reasons we're experiencing, significant delays is because there are people trying to find their way across Auckland, into or out of Auckland, who actually don't meet those criteria. That's slowing down everybody, particularly those who need to get somewhere and they're able to move.
Do you ask people to produce a letter or a bill with their primary residence on it?
Yes, we do. Our request is that they produce some information that demonstrates to us that they are an essential worker and that they are moving for an essential reason. Now, I appreciate that with the volume of traffic that's moving north and south, that's a big ask. But the risk is if they don't have it... Sorry to interrupt, but if they don't have it, do you then automatically turn them around? No evidence, no go? Yes, that has happened because... But does it happen every time? Look, I think that depends. My police colleagues are taking a very practical approach at the checkpoints as best as they can. And we appreciate with the volume of traffic moving through that there are times when some people may not have the documentation required, and we will do everything that we can in the time that we have, which is not a lot, to help understand their situation. And from time to time that does mean that we've needed to let some people through because they've been able to satisfy us of the reasons for their travel. But please, we've got to make sure that anyone moving is planning, that they are taking with them documentation that is able to demonstrate the police who they are, why they're moving, and that it fits within the criteria.
Because I've looked at your latest numbers, right? So 50,468 stops, 676 turned around. That means 49,792 passed through the checkpoints. Were they all really essential workers and people with legitimate reasons? Because that seems quite porous, the border.
Yes, Lisa. Look, those figures are up until 4 o'clock on Saturday. Yesterday, thousands of vehicles were turned around. We believe that now with the amount of messaging that is out there for people to understand and help them understand that our tolerance of people's, in some cases, excuses as to why they should travel is obviously lower, and we need to make some decisions and turn people around. My advice is planning and documentation will help them get to where they need to, if in fact they meet.
So there's a lag with those figures. The next load of figures is going to show that you've turned around way more people. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, it will. Okay. Yes, tomorrow morning that will be the case.
You would have seen the pictures of everyone enjoying the sun, going to a bunch of Auckland beaches, people mixing, using playgrounds that are supposed to be closed and sports fields, and having a good social time out in the sun. I know you're trying education, but do you think it's time to go with the fines now?
Well, look, we have issued warnings. We're getting fantastic support from the community in terms of people calling in and saying they're concerned about something that they've seen, so we are following those up.
But people are still doing it. Did you see those pictures on the weekend, Richard? They're still doing it.
Yes, I did.
So your commissioner has told us that already in legislation is the power for the police to give instant fines. So is it time to start using that?
Look, that's a bigger discussion than the one that we're having now, but we are discussing those very points with health and with all of government group that's in place. So there may well come a time when we need to take that approach. But for the best part now, the engagement that we've had with the public and the encouragement and education in the vast majority of cases, that's sufficient for people to help better understand what's expected, and it's only a very, very small number that we're having to warn.
I see you're beefing up the number of checkpoints, right? So you're up to about 13 now. Are people getting a little bit tricky? Were they skirting around the edges, going through other roads, getting through?
Yes, we did find that, Lisa, over the weekend. Sadly, there's a couple of small back routes in and out of Auckland, and we have now put checkpoints continuously 24/7 on all those locations.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is the Assistant Police Commissioner Richard Chambers there. Let's get to some breaking news now. The government has just agreed to give flexibility to Auckland schools to bring back Year 12 and 13 students under COVID Alert Level 3. The Ministry of Education is working through the legal requirements tonight and will be able to confirm tomorrow the date students can return. The headmaster of Auckland Grammar, Tim O'Connor, has been pushing for this and he will join us shortly. It is 28 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We love your feedback. Is it time to start fining people, particularly in the Auckland region, if they aren't sticking to the Alert Level 3 rules? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Director-General of Health insists there's been no testing failure for staff dealing with arrivals at the border and in quarantine facilities. There are 9 new cases of COVID-19 today in the community, and all of those are believed to be linked to the existing cluster. But while Dr. Ashley Bloomfield says officials are confident the virus re-entered via the border, he's admitted they may never know how that happened. Rachel Thomas reports.
Dr. Ashley Bloomfield says regular testing was being scaled up in quarantine facilities and at the border when the outbreak emerged. But he doesn't believe officials dropped the ball.
No, I don't think there's been a failure. I think that I know there's a desire to look for a point of failure here. Our border systems we have been continually strengthening. We have added in the testing of workforce, which was being scaled up as part of belt and braces. We have added in audits of infection prevention and control. We have added in the wider use of masks. We have got really clear procedures and protocols.
I understand that, but the Health Minister has said that there has been a failure and he has accepted responsibility for that. You disagree? There have been
Well, I don't think he said there was a failure.
He's technically right. The Health Minister didn't use that word. But on Saturday, Chris Hipkins said he was disappointed staff weren't being tested weekly after being assured that was the case.
That's frustrating, but actually I'm not going to distract people's attention from doing the job at hand to go back over that now. Everyone needs to be focused forward. There will be time to do that later on.
He took responsibility for his part in the situation and made it compulsory for all border staff to be tested. This morning, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern outlined in no uncertain terms that Cabinet had been let down regarding the frequency of testing.
When we ask as a Cabinet for something to happen, we expect it to happen. And so, of course, that has not met our expectations. No one, of course, said to us at any point that it wasn't, that I recall, that what we asked for was not happening.
The Prime Minister says the Jet Park facility was essentially a COVID-19 ward, which was why the call was made to test everyone weekly.
What it appears was happening is that there was testing on a weekly basis, but at this stage I cannot confirm that every single staff member on a weekly rota was being picked up by that weekly testing.
Today, Dr Bloomfield confirmed there are 9 new cases of COVID-19 in the community. He says officials are looking into some areas of interest in Auckland.
The Botany Mall between 1 and 2 p.m. on the 11th of August. Butterbean Motivation between 5:15 and 6 a.m. on the 10th of August. That's a fitness class at School Road in Kingsland. Then Eden Junior Rugby Club in Gribblehurst Park, Sandringham, between 5:30 and 6:30 p.m. on the 11th of August. And also a guinea pig show at the Auckland Cavvy Club in Hall Road between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. on the 8th of August.
Dr Bloomfield says people who have been in these places shouldn't panic, but be aware of symptoms. Meanwhile, he says although it appears the virus has come in across the border, there are still no clear leads on the origin of the outbreak.
The question of where it's come across the border and how is what we're trying to answer, those two questions. We may find some clues as to where, but we may still never quite answer the question of how it was transmitted, but we will do our best to do that.
The new cases take the total number of active cases to 78. For Checkpoint, Rachel Thomas.
The midnight deadline to have all those thousands of port staff tested has been abandoned as health authorities struggle to get through everyone. Around 12,000 people are expected to be screened at Auckland and Tauranga ports. Our video journalist Simon Rogers and reporter Nita Blake-Person filed this report.
It's another frantic day at the ports of Auckland. Efforts to get everyone tested for COVID-19 only add to the workload.
Officially here on 7 to 7, but we've been open since 5:30 this morning and we're not sure what time we're going to close, really.
Kevin Sandhu leads the medical team here on Auckland's waterfront.
At the moment, we're kind of getting through about 100 tests an hour, which is no small feat given that we don't really have a really big testing centre. But the girls have been great and we're just kind of gaining through them. I'm hoping all 6,000 port workers will be done by midnight tonight. My staff are quite tired. We've been here since Thursday. We would really like to get it over and done with, but we'll see how we go.
Around 835 companies come and go from the port. Ports of Auckland spokesman Matt Ball says they've been asking the government for testing at the port since last lockdown, and it was a long shot to think they'd get all staff tested by tonight.
It probably wasn't realistic to send out an instruction at 8:30 on a Friday night and expect around 6,000 people to get tested over the weekend and on Monday.
Other stations are also available for port staff to be tested at, but Wayne is one of around 500 who turned up here this morning.
I'm a truck driver, so I'm in and out all the time. So, as far as I know, this is all mandatory for anybody coming in now, so yeah, figured I might as well get it done.
But you just need to relax because this really helps, all right? You can try and relax as much as you can. The result will come to you within 5 days.
One ports worker has tested positive for COVID, but they've been identified through the contact tracing process and haven't been in contact with anyone at the port. Wayne says he thinks things here are safe.
I don't think it's linked. I think it's pretty safe. Most of the people coming in and out of here are pretty safe.
Auckland's not the only place being screened. Further south in Tauranga, at the country's busiest port, a mobile testing site only arrived at midday today. Another 6,000 workers there were also expected to be tested by midnight, but the Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says he's working with the Health Minister to extend that time frame.
Yes, we've extended the time frame there. There's no one's going to be penalised if they haven't had their test by later tonight.
Dr Bloomfield says testing at the ports is important.
The ports is an area that there's been quite a lot of focus on already over the last few months, and in particular over the last 5 or 6 weeks, where there's been that specific order in place which has been preventing crew from disembarking vessels other than very close to the vessel as required for tying up and unloading and keeping that physical distancing from port workers. So I don't think it's necessarily a high risk way that the virus could get into the country, but it's part of our really trying to cast the net wide and find, is there potentially some risk of infection at the port?
That testing is expected to go on as long as needed to rule out the ports as the source for New Zealand's latest COVID cluster. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, if you're just joining us, the government has agreed to give flexibility to Auckland schools to bring back year 12 and 13 students under COVID Alert Level 3. Auckland Grammar Principal Tim O'Connor will join us live. The number of infections appears to be flattening, but Victoria records a record number of deaths. 25 people died with COVID-19 overnight, the most since the pandemic began. And voters across the country welcome the new election date. We would love your feedback. What do you think about October 17th as a day to vote? Are you the parent of a 12 or year 13 student in Auckland, and what difference will returning to school earlier mean? And with at least one more week in level 3 lockdown, is it time for Aucklanders to face spot fines for leaving the city without an exemption? You can text us on 2101, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. My sincere apologies, but we're heading to the headlines late with Susanna.
Almost 1 million people will be supported by 2 wage subsidy schemes being offered by the government to deal with the economic challenges of the COVID-19 outbreak. A new nationwide subsidy to cover the period Auckland is in Alert Level 3 is being rolled out on top of the existing wage subsidy extension. The Finance Minister Grant Robertson says because of the Auckland situation, many businesses face massive revenue drops. COVID-19 testing of all workers at the Port of Tauranga and Auckland is underway and should be completed by the end of the week. The launch of port testing comes as the Director General of Health insists there has been no testing failure at the border, despite recent criticism from the Health Minister. Ashley Bloomfield says regular testing was being scaled up when the latest outbreak emerged, but he does not believe officials have dropped the ball. The police have set up 3 new checkpoints on Auckland's southern boundary to control traffic in and out of Auckland. They now have 13 checkpoints that have stopped more than 50,000 vehicles, and of those, almost 700 were turned around. Assistant Commissioner Richard Chambers has told Checkpoint he totally understands concerns from Waiheke residents about the number of visitors still coming to the island. He says ferry figures show that passenger numbers have dropped significantly, but there will always be a few people not doing the right thing. The Electoral Office has the ability to delay the election day in one region if it's deemed unsafe to vote. The Prime Minister this morning postponed the election to October 17th, saying any further moves are up to the Electoral Office. The Chief Electoral Officer, Alicia Wright, says once Parliament is dissolved, the Commission has the power to delay voting in a region. A light plane has crashed in hote, north of Wellington. The police say the crash happened near Otaki Gorge Road at about 1:30. RNZ understands a rescue helicopter flew to the scene earlier this afternoon, but the condition of the pilot is not yet known. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and it's time for the business news now with Emma Hatton, who joins us from our Wellington studio. Hi, Emma. So we've got 2 big listed companies, both with big half-year losses posted today. Talk us through the numbers.
That's right, Lisa. So we had results, half-year results today from Somerset, so the big retirement village operator, and from Refining NZ. So I'll start with Somerset. Their half-year profit was close to $1 million, basically knocked flat, a 99% drop on the same time last year. And that sounds really dramatic, but there's an explanation. It had to write down its valuations for its properties, what it thinks it could sell its properties for if it had to in the current market, and it's called a fair value movement. And so why that was written down so much is because of the uncertainty around the housing market due to COVID, predictions that it will soften. So that's where that basically came in. It had to write that down to a loss of $14.6 million. Last year it thought that it would make a gain on those properties, so close to $86 million. So that's more or less where the big change has come from. If you take that out of the equation, they actually did quite well during the period, considering that was the time that they were in lockdown. A strong rebound in sales they had post-lockdown, people buying new units and refixing their units and that sort of thing. They say construction of new units is actually tracking quite well, even though they had some delay there, of course, with the restrictions. They couldn't construct as many as they thought. They thought they'd get about 400 new units in this financial year. They think it might be more like 300 to 350 now, which is still pretty good considering. All of that does depend, though, on these new restrictions in Auckland and how long that might last. It could knock it back because obviously some of these new units are being built in Auckland. So, I mean, all in all, pretty well, but still a bit shaky for them there on that regard. Refining NZ is again a big hit, a little messier, I suppose. They made a loss of $186 million compared to a loss of $3.5 million the same time last year, and that's basically refining levels were so low, the demand just wasn't there. Cheap fuel could come in from overseas because globally oil prices were so low. So the low processing volumes that they did kicked in the fee floor, which is kind of a benchmark price that their users have to pay no matter what the margin is. So that was a bit of a lifeline for them. It was some guaranteed income during that time. But it slowed production right down at the refinery. It started it up again at a reduced capacity for 6 weeks, and then it might stop again, depending on what the demand's like. They're going to give us an update at by the end of this year on what their plans are, really, because they're mooting the idea of moving to import only, so they wouldn't do any more refining. It might be the best option for them, considering how hard this is all hitting them. It's just not really looking in their favour at this point.
OK, we've got a couple of Aussie companies with operations in New Zealand as well. Not so great for them either in terms of earnings results.
That's right. So we had some news from JB Hi-Fi, obviously the electronics retailer. They've had to write down the value of their New Zealand stores. Their New Zealand arm made a loss of close to $2 million. Of course, the hit from sales during the lockdown, because our lockdown was so restrictive compared with their stores over in Australia. So loss for them on that front. Also out of Australia today, we heard from the steelmaker BlueScope. So they operate the Glenbrook steel mill, which is in the south of Auckland, and Pacific Steel, which is in Otahuhu. And it's confirmed it's also writing down its New Zealand arm, which again posted an operating loss. It signalled last month that its New Zealand operations were actually under review, and it was planning to cull some jobs here, saying that the restructure could result in, quote, significant redundancies. The E2 union has actually, in fact, confirmed that 60 staff at the Glenbrook site were made aware of the proposal on Friday. So, the offer of taking voluntary redundancy there put to them as well. And BlueScope has said that if the restructure doesn't help make the company more viable here in New Zealand, it might actually look at closing the Glenbrook steel mill. So not a very good result from the other side of the ditch either.
Shall we take a quick whip around the markets, Emma?
Yeah, sure. So NZX Top 50 Index had a bit of a rally today, closed up 1.9% or 220 points, so finished at 11,672. New Zealand dollar 65.3 US, 91 Australian and 50 British pence.
Thanks, Emma. That's Emma Hatton joining us with our business news from our Wellington studio. A decision late this afternoon by the government will give school principals the option of allowing Year 12 and 13 students back to school early for face-to-face learning during Alert Level 3. Auckland Grammar Headmaster Tim O'Connor has been imploring authorities to allow some flexibility, especially for students so close to crucial assessments. And he joins me now. You must be pretty relieved tonight, Tim?
No, I'm ecstatic, Lisa. It's great news.
So how's it going to work?
Look, it is quite complicated. Clearly, the government have to work through the health order to be able to get dispensation for schools to return Year 12 and 13 students. And it sounds like that will happen tomorrow, and then we'll find out what day students can return. It is quite complicated because we are going to have to apply, of course, all of the appropriate health requirements, that is physical distancing, outside of 2 metres and 1 metre inside, classes of 20, not being able to mix those classes.
What about teachers? So the teacher has to stay with the same group of students, Tim?
The teacher can't be associated with more than one group of students, but the bubble of students can have more than one teacher. So there is going to be quite a lot of organisation that we're going to have to work through tomorrow to make this viable. It just might mean that students aren't with us for the entire day. It might be that the science-related students are together in a bubble, humanity-related students are in another bubble, etc., and we have teachers coming to and from them. But we'll work that through. The news is that any form of face-to-face contact is great for our young people.
So the thing is, and we've had some feedback on this already, that other teachers are saying, well, that's great if you're a high decile school, you get your way, and it's easier for you to do. This person, I'll just read one piece of feedback. Those of us teaching in low decile schools with high Māori and Pacific populations will be feeling really torn. We want to do our best for our students, but I personally would not feel it's safe to return to school at present. We also have less students with devices for distance learning through schools, although my school has done a magnificent job to ensure all students have a device. And also there are teacher-student ratios which could be an issue for some of the schools. So do you think that this unfairly advantages high decile schools and disadvantages the low decile ones with not so many resources?
No, I don't think so. I think what it does is provide schools with flexibility to be able to make decisions that are right for them and for their community. And one of the critical group of students who we need to be catering for in this process and this time of the term is actually our students who are involved with vocational pathways. And that is not necessarily students who are going through for high-stake external examinations, but students who are involved with a lot of practical work, and they simply will fall behind very, very quickly indeed.
But will some schools be faced with the dilemma that they simply do not have the number of teaching staff to have these, 20 students and one teacher and not mixing up the bubbles? That's a resource issue, isn't it? How many staff you've got versus how many students, while trying to keep the rest of the school going?
It depends how you want to skin the cat, really. This does not say that you have to have your entire Year 12 and 13 students on site every day. It may well be, and we have yet to decide, it may well be that we bring some Year 12 students on campus one day, some Year 13 students on campus another day. We may well choose to just group them so that we can cater for them with the resources that we've got. But I reiterate that any face-to-face contact is better than none, and I would urge any school in Auckland to be doing their utmost to return some of the students so that they get some contact.
How do you think the students are going to react to it? I know the decision's just come through, not sure if you've had a chance to speak to any of them, but how are they feeling about it?
They will be ecstatic. I can't speak for students across other campuses, but our young men will be ecstatic about this because it just gives them the opportunity for that face-to-face contact. It gives them the opportunity to be able to get prompt responses from teachers. Anything that we can give them, they will be grateful for. And I should say, we're very grateful to the Ministry of Education for listening and for supporting education of students across Auckland.
Do you always get such a positive response? Because you obviously articulated your concerns on this program last week, and then, hello, Monday, there's a seemingly change of position.
Oh, look, I have admitted to the Secretary-General that I'm the first to criticise them when I feel criticism is due. But I hope that this afternoon I was the first to congratulate them as well, because, as I've said, anything is better than nothing.
So you're obviously waiting on things from their end in order and to make sure it's all legal and above board, but how quickly can you swing into action once you get the thumbs up to go?
We'll be good to go for Wednesday. We've been preparing multiple scenarios. Our leadership team have been working some pretty significant hours for a whole pile of different options that we could put in place. So what we've got to do is wait for the final arrangements from the ministry tomorrow. We can see the general guidelines tonight. We've already seen those, so we know that there are some parameters within which we're going to have to work that are restrictive, but they are manageable at the same time.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Tim O'Connor, who is Auckland Grammar's headmaster, and he spoke to us last week raising his concerns about, well, senior students needing to come back to school. Well, the government has moved on this, and that will be possible for some students with some restrictions, as he said. It is 11 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback on that one. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. If you've got a student in year 12 or 13, will this make a difference? And really, is it an equal playing field for all schools? Let us know. Let's head to Australia now, where Victoria has recorded its biggest one-day increase in COVID-19 deaths since the pandemic began. Premier Daniel Andrews confirmed 282 new infections overnight and 25 deaths, more than the worst daily toll of 21 reported nationally on August 12.
By way of breakdown, one male in their 60s, 4 females and 3 males in their 70s, 6 females and 4 males in their 80s, 4 females and 3 males in their 90s. 22 of those 25 fatalities are linked to aged care outbreaks. There are 657 Victorians in hospital. 44 of those are receiving intensive care, and 32 of those 44 are on a ventilator.
Officials say whilst the death toll has risen, they are hopeful the lockdown is working as case numbers are falling. Almost 2 million tests have now been undertaken. Meanwhile, in New South Wales, there were 7 new infections reported overnight. 6 of those were cases of community transmission and 1 a returned traveller in hotel quarantine. It comes as families in the border towns of New South Wales and Queensland struggle to cope travelling between states to work and school. The ABC's Gemma Sapwell reports.
It's breakfast time in the Sayer household as the family of 5 get ready for a busy day. They live in northern New South Wales but work and go to school in Queensland and cross the border multiple times a day.
We're having to get up extra early, like at least an hour earlier than we normally would, so it's hard on the girls. It's long days.
Delays at border checkpoints and changing permit requirements make everyday life a challenge.
Yesterday the M1 was 45 minutes, but I've come Duckett Street today and we seem to be flowing a lot better.
Elizabeth Sayer says at the height of the border traffic chaos, her 6-year-old daughter suffered a serious medical episode at school.
I was stuck in traffic. The signs were saying minimum 2 hours to cross the border.
The mother of 3 describes it as the worst day of her life.
And I couldn't get to her and be with her. It was horrible.
The stress of the past 5 months has taken its toll on the family's mental health.
What I'm seeing in my rooms, lots of border community people, is grief and loss and trauma.
Schools along the border are also having to adapt, with buses running up to 2 hours late.
Our school is located directly on the border of Queensland and New South Wales. In fact, our back fence is the border. To combat some of the problems, we've staggered the end of our school day.
The only people currently allowed to enter Queensland by road are truck drivers, workers who transport freight, people performing essential activities and border zone residents. With the Queensland government flagging even tougher restrictions if New South Wales coronavirus cases move closer to Queensland, the Sayer family is now looking at moving north over the border.
A lot of the girls I work with, they're in Queensland. They've offered their house to us to move in with them, which is lovely, but we are a family of 5, so that's a last resort.
And that was the ABC's Gemma Sapwell reporting. Voters across the country have largely welcomed the new October election date, saying the delay was inevitable. The Prime Minister announced the change less than a week after raising the COVID alert levels across the country to deal with the Auckland outbreak. Tess Brunton has more.
In the midst of their 2-week lockdown, Aucklanders in Mangere were happy to hear they had more time before the election. While Save says the 4-week delay is a good move.
People might not be able to go to to vote because a lot of people are aging, and there's a risk. Some are, they have underlying health issues, so
it's a good idea.
It's a good idea.
James Ball says politicians need more time to showcase their policies after months of being bombarded with COVID-19 news.
It's a good thing that all the politicians have a bit more time to come up with what they'd like to see New Zealand look like in the future.
The brother of former Prime Minister Sir Bill English, Thomas Dermott English, says the delay had to happen.
There's constitutional constrictions on how far you can't push it too far back. And if you have it soon, especially in Auckland, it's just no one gets a chance to have their say when they're standing for Parliament. It's a good in-between.
In the capital, Wellington residents were also happy with the change.
I think it's sensible. Totally fine with it, yeah.
Do you think it's going to change the results?
I think anyone who thinks that's probably a bit ridiculous.
I'm okay about it. I hope it gives people a lot to think about and they're going to engage with the referendums. Are you worried about alert levels? No, I feel pretty confident the Electoral Commission's got plans and social distancing where I live to vote will be relatively easy.
In Christchurch, the Prime Minister's announcement drew some surprise. Louise Wilson had hoped for a different outcome.
I just thought, well, keep the date, there's no biggie really, but it's just campaigning, which costs lots of money. So I would have been happy for it to stay in September.
But it was a decision that Carol Chimpoi expected.
Well, actually not surprised because, there's so much focus on COVID at the moment, so it'd be crazy trying to vote for anyone, really.
Andy Larkin says 4 weeks arguably isn't long enough. He'd like to push it back until at least November. Mr. Larkin says he understands the government has to balance the economy with the health and safety of the nation.
I'd be talking at least 2 months, I think, until we can hopefully get the ramifications of COVID behind us and people can concentrate on what the parties have to offer.
Further south in Dunedin, most supported the move.
With the coronavirus and everything, yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Cameron doesn't mind when the election is, if he can still vote.
I mean, I guess as long as there's legal precedent for it. I mean, it is extraordinary circumstances, I guess, with a epidemic going on. As long as they have an election, I'm okay with it.
Jacinda Ardern has committed to no more election date changes, a move Warrington resident Gareth doesn't agree with.
The politicians should have 1 month electioneering before the actual vote, so I think it would be totally wrong to be under level 3 or 2 or whatever and prevent the politicians going out about to get their votes in.
In Nelson, Central City businessman Tim Babbage says the decision isn't rocket science.
You can't have an election in the middle of a pandemic. People have to be able to go out and vote.
The head of the Nelson Economic Development Agency, Mark Rawson, says the delay is sensible.
Obviously there's a lot of uncertainty and that's not going to be solved in the next 6 to 12 months. It is quite important though that we get this done and dusted in as short a time period as possible so that the business community have some level of certainty to deal with in the next couple of years, which are going to be pretty tough.
Advance voting will start on the 3rd of October before Election Day on the 17th of the month. For Checkpoint, Tess Brunton, TNA.
Well, it's time to get to some of your feedback before the 6 o'clock news, and boy, there's a lot of it. You don't take kindly to the Aucklanders who are, island hopping and going on other trips. This one in says, there are still arrogant, entitled fools who think the rules do not apply. I work with a young boy who, if he contracts COVID, will not survive. Some fool from Auckland, who is the CEO of some very important company, had a meeting in Waikato with someone I am in close contact with, and when questioned, shrugged it off and was off elsewhere in Waikato too. Go figure. And a lot of them are in that vein. Some of you really would like fines to come into play. This person says, I believe it is high time spot fines were imposed on people breaching COVID regulations. There is too much at stake, and I also think some examples being made might dissuade others from breaking the rules that are designed to prevent illness, death and untold economic repercussions. This person says, considering how much a further outbreak costs, yes, fines as a minimum, jails for repeat offenders. And this listener has got in touch to say, I am pulling my hair out listening to the police response to day trippers out of Auckland and onto Waiheke. Fine these people the maximum, a lot of capital letters in that sentence with some exclamation marks. Was it Queensland where those people came in on boats, each got fined $4,000? I'm so sick of this softly. The rest of us are doing the right thing for the greater good of everyone. Instant fines are not the necessary solution, another listener says, though. They'll tie up the courts. Absolutely implement fines, someone else says. There is simply too much at stake here for a soft approach. We need zero tolerance. Another listener says 6 months hard labour. Not sure whether they're joking or not. Another person says, yep, fine them. This is not a rehearsal. But this one in, the rules are being broken all over Auckland. You cannot fine half the population. Visiting second homes, kids playing together, parties, football games with friends. Many people in Auckland don't support being put into level 3 and they don't care about the so-called rules.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leātaua tēnei. The government estimates around 930,000 jobs will be supported by its wage subsidy schemes. It's announced a new nationwide subsidy to cover the period Auckland is in Alert Level 3. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
The new scheme is on top of the existing wage subsidy extension, which is open until September 1st. Businesses whose revenue has dropped at least 40% for at least 14 days within August 12th and September 10th compared to last year will be able to apply. The government is also making it easier for those who need to self-isolate to access the Leave Support Scheme. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says it's important that there are no barriers to people getting COVID tests. This is Yvette McCullough.
Police say that people trying to sneak in or out of Auckland are holding up essential workers who need to get to work. There are now 13 checkpoints operating to the north and south of the city, where more than 50,000 vehicles have been stopped so far. Assistant Commissioner Richard Chambers has told Checkpoint that a few people are making the wait longer for everyone.
One of the reasons we're experiencing, significant delays is because there are people trying to find their way across Auckland, into or out of Auckland, who actually don't meet those criteria. That's slowing down everybody, particularly those who need to get somewhere and they're able to move.
Richard Chambers. The 3 outstanding COVID-19 test results from cool store chain Americold are negative. The Mount Wellington facility in Auckland now has 10 positive cases, 7 of which are employees and the balance are contractors. An Americold employee is earliest known case of COVID-19 in the new outbreak. Its managing director Richard Winnall says it's been a frustrating delay for the staff waiting for an answer since last week.
In the last 24 hours, we're pleased to confirm that we've got all of the results back from our employees at our Mount Wellington facility, which is great, so no one waiting anxiously. We were left with a net total of 10 positive cases from this facility.
Richard Winnall says they are still waiting for results of environmental testing at the cool store to rule out freight transmission. The manager of the Māngere and Otara community testing centres says many people being tested know people within the Auckland COVID cluster. Over the weekend, the centres processed around 550 tests a day. On Friday, they handled around 600 and there were queues around the centre's car parks. Pauline Fuimaono-Sanders says there has been a steady flow of people seeking a test today.
We've had a lot that are connected to the clusters because all the schools and churches are based in Māngere, so there's a lot of the residents, are connected to one of those, the schools, churches or the workplaces. So they just want to come and get checked.
Pauline Fuimaono-Sanders of the Māngere and Otara community testing centres. People around the country have thrown their support behind the decision to delay the election by 4 weeks. The new 17th of October date was announced by the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern earlier today. It followed last week's decision to raise the COVID alert levels across the country in a bid to deal with the Auckland outbreak. Auckland resident Scott Belcher says it's the right move for voters and politicians.
They don't really have enough airtime at the moment, just kind of like every time you flick on the news it's just sort of COVID, so yeah, you haven't really heard much of policies or anyone else's parties and that sort of stuff, so I think it's probably a good thing that they've actually postponed it until things sort of quieted down a bit.
Scott Belcher. Advance voting will start on the 3rd of October. A pilot is dead after a light plane crash in Hote, north of Wellington. The police say the crash happened near Otaki Gorge Road about 1:30. They've now confirmed the death and referred it to the coroner. The Civil Aviation Authority says the pilot was flying a Sonex fixed-wing aircraft. It will send 3 investigators to the scene tomorrow. It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 6. The upcoming North Island versus South Island rugby match could be moved from Auckland to Wellington. Eden Park's hosting of the August 29th game is in doubt, with Auckland at COVID-19 alert level 3 until at least midnight on August 26th. New Zealand Rugby says they're hopeful the match can still be played in Auckland, but are making contingency plans for it to be played in the capital on the same day. The squads will be announced tomorrow and will assemble in Wellington on Monday next week. The national body wants government exemptions for the Auckland-based players and management to travel to Wellington. A final decision on the venue for the match will be made on Friday. Patrons at pubs on Australia's Central Coast have reportedly been signing into bars using the names of New Zealand Rugby League players amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Sydney's Daily Telegraph newspaper reports a player's wife saw her husband's name signed on a register at a pub near the team's base at Tauranga. The report said the wife knew for a fact that her husband was not at or had been at the premises. Australian Charles Porter, who was part of one of the most dramatic high jump finals in Olympic history, has died aged 84. Porter claimed a silver medal in the 1956 Melbourne Games. The final lasted more than 5 hours, with all of the top 4 finishers breaking the Olympic record. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, James Nakisa is eating fried chicken in the shower with broadcaster John O'Pryor. Nick Bollinger samples the latest from the local garage rock scene. This week's sportscaster Peter Lamp was just getting back into the club rugby scene until COVID made a comeback. And John Horrocks on his novel Dark Empire, which picks up where Catherine Mansfield's At the Bay left off 10 years later. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. A few showers turning to rain in Northland tomorrow. Waikato to Kapiti, also Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Mainly fine. Isolated showers developing in Bay of Plenty and Taupo tomorrow, and rain in Taranaki tomorrow night. Gisborne through to Wairarapa and Wellington. Mainly fine weather. High cloud increasing tomorrow. For Nelson, Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, fine tonight, becoming cloudy tomorrow. Rain developing by tomorrow night with heavy falls in some places. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, fine tonight apart from some areas of cloud. Cloud increasing tomorrow with scattered light rain at night. And Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, a few showers, clearing tomorrow morning. RNZ National, 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And before we move on, let's address the person who's not in the room. Jed has got in touch to say, how come we aren't seeing Susanna read the news live anymore? She has the nicest smile on radio, followed by about 7 exclamation marks. Susanna is reading the news live, but we're in different work bubbles, so she's on a different floor. We miss her too. Well, let's move on now. The government has revealed its latest financial measures to lessen the economic fallout under the second wave of COVID-19 under alert levels 2 and 3. The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, has announced a new wage subsidy and changes to the leave scheme. Charlie Drever reports.
Grant Robertson says the wage subsidy will be nationwide and has similar criteria as the extended wage subsidy.
To qualify for the new subsidy, a firm must have had or be predicting a revenue drop of at least 40% for any consecutive period of at least 14 days within the period of 12 August to 10 September compared to a similar period last year. So it can be both a retrospective and prospective assessment.
The combined cost of both the new wage subsidy and additional businesses now eligible for the extended wage subsidy is expected to total $1.6 billion and impact 930,000 jobs. The cost will be covered by the underspend of the extended wage subsidy. To increase wide-scale testing, the revenue test on the leave support scheme will also no longer apply from Friday. This will mean that businesses with workers who have to self-isolate will receive the equivalent of the wage subsidy to help cover that person's wages while they're away.
The crucial role that people feeling confident about their income has in them being willing to take a test and then obviously self-isolating if they need to after that is critical. We've seen that now, and particularly when we look at this particular outbreak where, you know, it may affect people who come from low-income backgrounds, job occupations that are lower income. We just want to make absolutely sure that no one sees a barrier to being tested, because that is so important for all of us.
The mortgage deferral scheme is also being extended from September 27 to March 31st. Grant Robertson says Cabinet has also decided to task officials with investigating longer-term solutions.
Firstly, to report back on a more sustainable longer-term support scheme that can adapt to changing alert levels, is easily administered and can be easily understood and communicated. This work will include looking at other existing schemes to see if they are still fit for purpose.
The National Party finance spokesperson Paul Goldsmith says the party supports the wage subsidy, but as a longer-term economic solution, there can't be further failures at the border.
The foundation of any economic plan to get New Zealand back in shape is to have an effective border containment. And if we're not doing that, if we're not testing the people who work at the border properly, then people find that astounding, and that's a huge risk to take. So we've got to get that right.
Paul Goldsmith says the government can't have an elimination strategy and take such big risks at the border. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
Right now, the Electoral Commission won't rule out going to the ballot box, even if parts of the country are still in alert level 3 by the new date of October 17. Once the Governor-General formalises the election date, any decision to delay it further on the grounds of safety is made by the Commission's Chief Electoral Officer. The Commission's been planning for an election where the country's at alert level 2 or alert level 2 with a maximum of 5,000 people under tougher level 3 restrictions. Beyond that, Chief Electoral Officer Alicia Wright says we could be in uncharted territory. I spoke to her a little earlier and I asked her if October 17 was the Commission's preferred date.
We identified the different things that the Prime Minister might want to consider when she was making a selection, but we didn't put forward a recommendation.
OK, so I imagine you will be working towards planning for every possible contingency. So once the writ is issued, basically the paperwork's done, the date is locked in, what power does the Commission have in terms of changing that date, and what would shape any decision to do that?
So once Parliament has been dissolved, the Chief Electoral Officer has the power to adjourn. And generally, that power is around making a judgment about whether people can vote safely. And it's really designed around a whole variety of different scenarios, like earthquakes or tsunamis, and pandemics as well. And so it's about whether or not voters can go safely into a voting place. So what we'll need to be considering is whether people can do that and what alternative voting mechanisms we can put in place instead.
So, could we have a safe election with large parts of the country at level 3 lockdown?
That's exactly the sort of thing that we would need to work through. We've prepared for and are ready to deliver an election nationwide at level 2 with contact tracing, physical distancing, hand sanitizer. We've got, and the reason we're having that larger and longer advanced voting period is so that people can come in and out of the voting place quickly. We are working with the Ministry of Health to see if those services can be adapted, but we need to be doing that, and we're working through that right now.
So the Prime Minister has said that you're planning for level 2, but with some part of the country at level 3. How many people could you cope with at level 3 to still hold an election safely with your current planning?
So with our current planning, that was clusters around the country of up to 5,000 people across the country. So we were planning on clusters where we provided a takeaway service into those clusters and to provide that service in that way.
So, Alicia, just to be clear, when you're talking about clusters, are you talking about communities being locked down? You could cope with 5,000 people being under level 3 restrictions.
That's right, and so and we can provide those sorts of services. What we do need to be working through is we're prepared for level 2 right across the country, and we are working with the Ministry of Health on how we can adapt those services to see if those venues could still work at a level 3. And the sorts of things we're going to need to be looking at are the venues appropriate? How would we need to change the services that we applied, whether physical distancing would need to change, and what additional things we would need to have in place. We're still working that through and are working with the Ministry of Health on that.
So when you're planning for an election where people are at level 2 and up to 5,000 people are at level 3. You could manage that safely. That's a town the size of Dargaville or Cromwell. So if we get any bigger than that, you can't do it safely?
And we would need to work that through and identify, and that's exactly why we need to identify how and in what way we could adapt the services if need be.
Have you not already run that scenario?
We're working that. We're looking at how we can do that. What we've identified all along in terms of our planning assumptions has been level 2, and all of the mechanisms in place for level 2, with clusters across the country. So one of the things that we would need to work through and identify is if that's a much bigger area, how we could provide that service, what the options are available, and whether adjournment is an option that we would need to consider.
So you're not ruling out at this point the prospect of holding an election with significant parts of the country in level 3. You're not ruling that out yet.
We need to work that through with the Ministry of Health, and we're working and we're doing that right now, and we're identifying whether we can, and if we can, we'll get the word out about that. Any decision around adjournment would need to be done in consultation with the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister.
So does it have to be a consensus decision? If you decided it was unsafe to go ahead with the election and your best advice was to move it, would you require a consensus decision?
The decision sits with the Chief Electoral Officer.
So you would discuss it with them, but ultimately it's your call?
That's right. It's probably worth mentioning that adjournment can occur in a small area, and it's not a blanket, and and can be quite bounded in terms of how it works.
So can you just detail for us how far you could delay an election and how many times you could on the basis of safety?
So the legislation's quite clear. The first adjournment is for 3 days, and then each adjournment from that point is 7 days onward.
So if you can delay then subsequently by 7 days at a time, how many times can you do that?
The legislation doesn't specify.
So we're in uncharted territory, basically, if that should happen.
If that should happen. But if we were in that sort of an adjournment period, we would need to work that through on 7-day increments. And every single time, it requires ensuring that we're working with the Ministry of Health in this case, but also doing that consultation with the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister.
How many more people will qualify to vote as a consequence of the date of the election shifting, do you know?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. No, I don't know, actually, off the top of my head. So every single day, of course, people turn 18, and it would be the number of people who are turning 18 over the next 3 to 4 weeks, because they have until Election Day to turn 18 to be eligible to vote.
So you anticipate there will be a swathe of young people who now qualify?
That's right. All of those people who turned 18 between September 19th and October 17th will get a crack at voting that wouldn't have gotten a crack earlier.
And that is the Chief Electoral Officer, Alicia Wright. Text us if you're one of those people who gets to vote now that the election has been delayed. Text us on 2101. Are you excited or can't be bothered? A Pacific community leader believes fear about the origin and size of the latest coronavirus outbreak is driving social media vitriol and finger-pointing. And the chairman of NetSafe is warning social media users that they are not immune to legal action if they repost harmful content. Jill Bonnet reports.
It was a false rumour doing the rounds, widely circulating on social media. The allegation was a woman broke into managed isolation where her boyfriend infected her with COVID-19. The health minister roundly dismissed the rumour and urged people to be wary of where information's coming from. The chairman of the Pacific Response Coordination Team, Pakilau Manese-Lua, says the family affected by the social media post is struggling with what's been written about them. He says there's a lot of fear in the community as no one knows when and how the virus re-emerged, but people need to stop the finger-pointing.
We've struggled this time around because this has hit us right in our backyard, totally unaware. So we don't even know where the source of this current outbreak is, and that's what's causing the fear. Not so much that our Pacific family have it, but they can't pinpoint where they got it from. That's the scary thing, not just for Pacific and Māori, but for every New Zealander.
He says it's important to know the ethnic makeup of those who are infected, so the community understands the risks, but without blame being placed on any group. The police say they're not investigating the social media post under the Harmful Digital Communications Act. An internet law specialist, Rick Shearer, who's the chair of NetSafe, says a victim of such posts can make a complaint to NetSafe and also take the case to court if it's not resolved. They could also take a case for defamation or breach of privacy.
It's not just the original source. Anyone who spreads this sort of material can themselves be liable. Of course, the likelihood of an individual taking action against hundreds of people who might have spread this is low, but that doesn't mean to say that people shouldn't be aware that by spreading this information they could be brought into these sorts of processes.
A technology commentator, Paul Brislin, says Facebook has to take more responsibility. He says the media giant stopped being a neutral platform for people's views and comments when it began suggesting content.
We've got laws in place that just don't get tested a lot because people say, well, it's just too big a problem. I think we've got to start somewhere and we've got to start holding them to account and get them to come up with the solutions to help solve this problem.
Facebook's been approached for an interview. It sent a statement outlining the steps it's taking globally to remove content which could lead to imminent harm or which it classes as harmful COVID-19 misinformation. For Checkpoint, Jill Bonnet.
Most campaigners are breathing a sigh of relief that the election has been delayed another month, giving them precious time to change more minds. The two referendum topics have been subject to much debate this year, but for those most involved in campaigning, clearly not enough. Alex Perrottet reports.
In the latest attempt to get the public thinking about euthanasia and what the end-of-life choice bill is proposing, Vote Safe New Zealand has launched an online quiz. There's 10 questions aimed at surprising people with how little they might know about what might quickly become law after the election. Enoch Kloosterboer from Vote Safe New Zealand says many people he speaks to don't know some of the basics.
They can actually take a simple 10-question quiz which will help them to upskill on some of these less known details that are very relevant and important to how we decide to vote. And we're not really wanting to tell people how to vote, but we're just wanting to make sure that everyone is actually truly informed on the wider implications of what the Act would allow.
He says he was also campaigning for a delay to the election and had launched an online petition that garnered 2,500 signatures before the Prime Minister's announcement this morning. He says there's been confusion about the topics and more time would help.
You're very happy with the response of government to delay the election and particularly the referendum. People are not necessarily up to the play with what it's actually about or not about. So we're hearing a lot of people who believe that the referendum is actually about things like turning off life support or do not resuscitate orders or, palliative medication that may hasten death, whereas all of these options are already legal currently. So that's sort of what we're up against with the public.
But the bill's proponent and number one campaigner David Seymour, who says the Prime Minister had no choice but to delay the election, says it's patronising to say people aren't across the detail.
And I would caution my opponents from belittling or patronising the New Zealand people. The New Zealand people have what I call a finely honed BS detector, and I warn my opponents not to trigger those detectors because it won't help them in their effort to turn people against choice. Very happy to keep making the case to New Zealanders over the coming 9 weeks that actually people suffer in New Zealand, and a compassionate society will give those people who suffer choice and compassion under the law.
He says the government referendum website is to be best trusted for information, though opponents of the bill say they're unhappy with the way the official questions are explained on that site, arguing the phrase assisted dying reflects something that's already legal and current practice, and the language of the bill, specifically lethal dose, is more accurate language that should be employed. Voters will also get more time to mull over marijuana, with Chloe Swarbrick saying she's happy there's more time to convince people.
There's just greater opportunity to have those conversations with people. And in my experience, unless you are approaching somebody who is not all too willing to open themselves up to the evidence, most people do end up coming around to the fact that a more sensible control and regulation of cannabis makes far more sense than the status quo that we've got. So if anything, these extra 4 weeks, I would hope, enable us to change a few more minds.
She says there's also some questions to be asked about campaign spending, now that all parties may be at risk of breaching their caps.
Extrapolating out to other political parties and probably also those third-party promoters or registered promoters who are engaged in the referendum have probably had their spending allocated in advance to this. So it'll be interesting to see if any new twists or turns do arise.
Bob McCoskrie from Family First has been on a national tour to talk down both referendum topics and says the lockdown has cut short his plans.
Very difficult to have public meetings and engage with people face to face, and I don't think we want a whole campaign based totally online. You miss out a whole proportion of the population.
He says he's happy for more time and thinks it will ultimately suit the no campaigns.
Well, we haven't even done the South Island yet. We had 2 weeks scheduled for the South Island. I was hoping that, they would have no cases and they could just go back to normality. But really difficult planning. But it's not just for us. It's for both sides of the debate. It's for the politicians, the campaigns. It's a tricky time.
The Electoral Commission says it's still working through the impact of the date change on expenditure limits and what that means for parties and campaigners. It says it will be giving updated guidelines as soon as possible. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
Hundreds of people have gathered in the Spanish capital, Madrid, to protest against the mandatory use of face masks and other coronavirus restrictions. There were similar scenes in Warsaw as people called for an end to strict measures imposed by the government. The BBC's Tim Allman reports.
No social distancing at this demonstration. Packed in together, close as can be, the unmasked of Madrid. With their angry cries of freedom, they seem to believe their government is now a bigger threat than the virus itself. I'm here because there are too many repressive measures, said this demonstrator. They're taking all our rights away from us. The solution is that everybody takes to the streets to raise their voices, insisted this man. We need to prove to them that we know what this is about and that we are claiming our rights. Spain was one of the earliest and hardest hit countries in the pandemic and has had more cases than any other nation in Western Europe. Infections have spiked in recent weeks, but for these protesters, the battle to combat COVID has gone too far. It was a similar story in Warsaw, where there was another anti-mask march. Here they argue any restrictions aimed at fighting the virus are illegal and unconstitutional. In Paris, face masks are now compulsory in much of the city, which has been named a high-risk zone. The attitude here seems a little more accepting.
I think it is best to wear it everywhere. At least we know we're protected. Are we going to get to a second wave? We don't know. So the best thing we can do is to protect ourselves everywhere.
Face masks have become symbolic, part of a political debate. But scientists insist they are still vital in the fight against coronavirus.
And that was Tim Allman reporting there. Some quick feedback before you go. Still, well, the majority of you reckon we should have instant fines for people who break COVID rules. This person says the fine, though, should be based on income. Another listener says, I live on the Coromandel Peninsula and everyone I know around here has noticed the increase of out-of-towners at their beach houses. I wonder what out-of-towners look like. And this person says, definitely time to spot fine people who refuse to follow the Level 3 directives, especially those who attempt to get to their holiday homes, risking the spread of the virus to more vulnerable communities in Northland and the Coromandel. Don't forget you can go online and see our video stories, and First Up is back first thing tomorrow morning.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Auckland schools will be allowed to let some Year 12 and 13 students return to class under the COVID-19 Level 3 restrictions, provided they social distance and stay in small groups. The government estimates around 930,000 jobs will be supported by its extra wage subsidy schemes, announced today in the wake of falling business revenue relating to the virus. Police say that people trying to sneak through Auckland perimeter checkpoints are holding up essential workers who need to get to work. A pilot is dead after a light plane crash near the Otaki Gorge north of Wellington. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
And so we can compare any case that we see in New Zealand to other cases we find in New Zealand and to ones found around the world.
Live with local, national and international stories.